Marketing today has suffered. Billions, hundreds of billions of dollars are being spent everywhere on marketing.
We expose for 2 million television commercials throughout life. That's the same as watching 8 hours of television commercials 7 days a week for 6 years.
The economy is in recession. So every dollar spent must make a big difference. Neuromarketing makes every dollar spent in marketing extremely efficient.
So neuromarketing is using new, sophisticated brain research techniques. And in principle, they all have one objective, that is to understand our unconscious part of the brain. That's
Neuromarketing is the use of neuroscience techniques alongside classical marketing techniques, which means trying to see how the brain reacts to something new, for example, products, ad campaigns, or movie trailers.
Neuromarketing is very simple. You analyze brain waves to get at the effectiveness of marketing, advertising, merchandising, brand, in-store, everything. But without asking people questions, you're looking at it directly from the brain, directly, with no interpretation, no human interpretation, but directly reading it.
There are major problems with classical marketing techniques, such as questionnaires and focus groups. Questionnaires are biased, and focus groups can be dominated by one person who, mentally speaking, seizes power over the others because of his or her personality. The advantage promoted by the neuromarketing industry is the non-verbalization aspect. People are not asked what they think.
If you take Apple, right, and you say, what does brand Apple mean? You may say, Apple means hip, cool, and sexy. Apple means user-friendly. And Apple means cutting edge. The traditional approach to doing that is to go to somebody and say, do you think Apple is hip, cool, and sexy? Do you think Apple is cutting edge? But the moment I ask you a question, I have already biased the answer. If you ask a person, you can never get the answer. So that is why we measure it deep in the subconscious where the brand truly resides.
What we do every day is irrational. In fact, what's so funny is we as consumers think we are deeply rational, but 85% is actually deeply irrational. And that's the reason why brands still affect us, because in the end of the day, brands are just emotions you put on top of a product. In reality, you cannot touch it, you cannot feel it, it's just in our minds. And that's the reason why this whole neuromarketing is taking off so quickly, because the industry has been desperate to find out ways how we can understand the irrational mind, because it's such a strong battleground in order to build brand equity in our brains.
Imprinting a particular brand in our brain, therefore, could only work through the decoding of our subconscious. The largest neuromarketing study in the world conducted to date is the book Buyology, Truth and Lies About Why We Buy. Its Danish author, Martin Lindström, is a veritable marketing guru. The primitive brain, also called the reptilian brain, is easy to blame here. According to a theory developed in the 1960s, the brain is composed of 3 layers. The theory states that an archaic brain, the famous reptilian brain, makes up the oldest layer. Inherited from reptiles, this layer determines a certain amount of reflex behavior, such as aggressiveness and flight. The middle layer, inherited from the first mammals, is responsible for more complex behavior, linked to memory and emotion. The upper layer, the neocortex, facilitates abstract thought and language. Stemming from the successive stages of human evolution, the 3 brains have trouble communicating with each other. A bit like computers when confronted with new encoding systems. The problem with this theory is that it rests on false notions of brain anatomy and function, and a false picture of how the brain has evolved from one species to another over millions of years. In other words, if you get angry, Don't blame it on your reptilian brain.
The very idea that there might be any kind of trigger button in the brain belittles our most complex system. The brain is the most complex organ in our bodies in terms of both structure and functioning. The idea that we have a criminal bump and a buy button is scientifically false. But it's a good marketing argument. Paul Valéry often said that what is simple is false, and what is not simple is useless. When it comes to selling neuromarketing, you will hear people talk about reptilian brains, buy buttons, instant decisions, contrast, and fear. Unfortunately for marketers, and luckily for us, the consumers, the decoding of the brain is still a long way off.
All colas are the same. All colas are the same. I'll just have a cola. 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 I'll just have a...
Yeah, you'll have the...
I'll just have...
You'll have the...
I'll just have a Coke.
Is the neuro dimension of neuromarketing then above all a marketing argument? In the end, are all these measures actually useful? Do they work, or are they just a load of hot air? And if they do work, do we risk being increasingly influenced, if not manipulated?
Today, absolutely no honest marketer will tell you that they have the ultimate solution, i.e., a commercial that is 100% effective thanks to neuroscience. Everything we know about the brain is overestimated by investors and by the industrialists. On the other hand, it would be hypocritical to say that neuromarketing doesn't work, that it is useless. Today we're in a situation where neuroscience can help with learning to read or treating certain conditions, and we all agree that it adds something in these cases. So if it adds something to studies of this kind, which are conducted for the public good, so to speak, it can also help to understand consumer behavior.
We never go anything to do with manipulation. We merely measure. We don't create ads. We don't create subliminal anything. We go nowhere near it.
Personally don't see there's a mechanism or economic viability in using imaging data or any psychological data, even focus group data, to try and manipulate consumers, because the true fact of the matter is if you try and sell them something that they don't want and you oversell it, then they don't buy it.
Subliminal advertising. A very subversive technique which uses images flashed before our eyes that last only a split second, but just long enough to imprint in our vulnerable minds a product's name. Not just that either. Sophisticated vocal tricks are sometimes used without our realizing it at a conscious level.
Nobody waited for MRI scans and brain images before manipulating people and getting them to buy things they didn't want or didn't know about. Manipulating or influencing consumers. You can play around with the words, but basically getting consumers to make decisions that they didn't want to make. This is unique to marketing and applied consumer psychology.
And I think that's why these so-called neuromarketers are interested in these techniques, because they think, here's a desire meter, and now I'm going to manipulate all this stuff and see if it changes the desire meter. That's a very simplistic view of how the brain works, by the way.
This is the perfect project for you.
This is the perfect project for us.
The government should really go in and put some frameworks on what should be allowed and what should be illegal.
A candle can provide light. A candle can burn a building. We should be careful in what we use the candle for and not blame the candle.
So I think it's hard to control the applications. On the other hand, I think it's essential for scientists to take responsibility for communicating their findings to the public and for commenting on the uses of those findings.
I believe in the human race to make wonderful things out of this knowledge. So I'm going to take the side that knowing more about ourselves can only make us better.
This is really the good news, I think, for the consumer. We cannot place a buy button in consumers' brains, and thank God for that. We cannot in any way control people's thoughts, or for that sake read what you're thinking.